Hear ye, my good vinyl citizens. This is the state of the vinyl union.
Yeah, we wanted to just kind of... John apparently, next he's going to recite the Declaration of Independence. We wanted to talk, we were at the Crossroads show this last time. We wanted to talk about like kind of where, from our perspective, the vinyl craze is. And as a collector who only collects, who doesn't buy stuff to sell it, it may be a different perspective than a lot of other people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, because the folks we know from the shows who are buying and selling records, they have records they keep, but they also are buying stuff to sell it.
Yeah, which is a totally different perspective and gives you insight into different things. But my perspective has definitely changed, maybe in the last 4 or 5 years, because when you think about it, 2020 came along and everybody, the world stopped. There were also supply chain issues that affected records and production of records, affected supply, and most importantly, affected price. So while it nothing really popped up in my head as a vinyl consumer price-wise, but that was kind of the first big bump.
Yeah,
that, right?
I mean, the number one driver of economics is supply and demand.
Yeah.
So there was a high demand because a lot of people were getting into vinyl because, they're stuck at home and they're like looking for something to do. And for whatever reason, vinyl's the thing that a lot of people latched onto, even though the vinyl wave had been climbing for several years, since 2007.
Yeah, 2007 is the year that everybody kind of demarcates as the turnaround where everything has built from.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was 2007. I mean, you and I kind of jumped on it, I don't know, 11 or 12 maybe?
Yeah, somewhere in there.
I mean, I never really stopped buying records. They just got harder and harder to find.
Right.
But then they became easier and easier to find. Just from being at record shows in different parts of the country at different times, it never seems like that wave is going to crash into the beach. And
No.
And also from my perspective, I mean, this time of year, toward the end of the year, I go on a buying hiatus, and then I add any records that I might want as gifts to a list, and I don't buy that much for myself. But I've gotten to a point in my collection where there's just not a lot that I don't have that I want.
Right.
Right?
I mean, when you get, and part of it is the volume. I mean, when you get 2,000 to 3,000 records, that's a lot of records.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a lot to keep track of, but the industry does a great job of representing things that we already have. I mean, when you think about it, when I was a kid, I had 45s, I had vinyl records, I listened to 8-tracks, I listened to cassettes for a really long time, with the Sony Walkman. And then now we're back to records.
Yeah.
And it's just such a crazy industry that you think is going to climb. And there has to be an end in sight, right?
Right. And I think a lot of people are starting to, and the economy has not been great, but there's a great book by Malcolm Gladwell called The Tipping Point,
Mm-hmm.
and it talks about cultural phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
And hey, at one point, it's going to go down.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the way it works with everything. I don't care, if it's, classic cars or records. At some point, that market just dips a little bit.
Yeah. And we may be at that point now. Because when you think about it, like my experience is I'm much more selective now about buying things. But then again, when we do shows and I have to flip through my records, I'm always amazed at records I don't have.
Or when we do an anniversary show,
Right. Right.
it's like, oh, I don't have that. I'd really like to have that. So you put it on your background list. I'd like to get this.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's not something you're actively seeking out. It's not like I'm going to sell the farm to have this record.
No, I mean, and there's another difference there too, is I personally, and we've talked about it a lot, I will invest in repops because I want the media to sound good.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I want the record to sound good. Like, so even collectible stuff, if the record sounds good and the jacket is a little beat up, I don't care because I want the record. I'm going to play it. I'm going to listen to the music, and that's my end goal. My
Right.
end goal is not like, what's the value of this album?
Yeah, in the industry, when you think about it, they have gotten us to rebuy our collections. Like you said that you kind of stopped buying vinyl when you started collecting CDs.
Yeah, because I worked in a record store,
Yeah.
and when we heard that, hey, eventually the industry is going to quit making vinyl,
Yeah.
it's like, well, guess what? I'll keep everything I have. I stored it,
Yeah.
and I replaced a lot of that on CD. Now I'm doing the opposite. I'm buying albums for the CDs that I had.
Yeah, well, we've talked about this before too. The mid '90s, a lot of those records have never been released on vinyl.
Yeah.
Like I just saw a Hootie and the Blowfish box set from like '94 to 2001, I think, is coming out soon. Some of those, and those are big selling albums. Some of those were never produced on vinyl. It's just crazy. That no matter how hard I try, my internal inventory of what I have on vinyl and CD, it kind of starts
It gets
to blur.
mixed up, yeah.
Yeah. But I've done a really good job of not like repeat buying things. And I'm not one of those people that has, like an Excel spreadsheet of my collection either.
Yeah.
Or I don't even have it in Discogs. But as we go on, it seems like to me personally, there's more and more stuff that appears. I'm like, oh man, I never even thought that never would have been originally released on vinyl.
Right.
And so those are the things. Now I'm to the point in my collecting where I'm getting a lot more selective about, the things that I buy.
Yeah, and it's when you're at a show, it's kind of hard to keep that discipline.
Yes.
You see stuff and it's like, oh, I want that. I want that.
Yeah, it's an overload, right?
Yeah.
Like there's so many different, especially the Crossroads show, because it's probably one of the best around,
Oh,
at
yeah.
least these parts. But it is like everything you've ever looked for and wanted is going to show up at those kinds of shows, because you've got guys from the city where the show is, the region, you've got guys from out of state. You've got guys bringing Japanese pressings. It's pretty, any way that you want to go at a show like that, you can go.
Yeah, and I mean, there are retail outlets, shows, they're all saying attendance and sales are down, which is understandable because you knew what was happening during COVID couldn't go on forever.
Right.
It's just not sustainable.
Right. Yeah.
And now that the industry's catching up and printing some of these records that were in high demand, it's changing the market.
Yeah. And, talking to a lot of the sellers at the last show, it seems like the general consensus is that they feel we've felt like this vinyl wave that's been going and going and going. Every year it seems like we talk about it finally crashing. Well, it kind of seems like overall the thought is that it's starting to. right?
Yeah, or maybe it's coming back to a more realistic point.
Yeah, where
Because I think the record industry has figured out, wow, people really want this stuff, and if they can't find it on the used market, we'll just repress it.
right, and catalogs of bands are opening up all the time. We've seen a lot of bands. We've seen Pink Floyd in the last year, Bruce Springsteen, ZZ Top. We've seen a lot of these bands sell their catalogs off to companies that are trying to monetize the music contained therein. And that makes sense from the perspective that most of these stars that we've talked about before are in their 70s or 80s. You got to strike while the iron's hot.
Right.
For sure. It will be interesting to see where vinyl is in another 3 years. I think that's going to be a very telling time.
Yeah, it may shrink back to what it was in 2017, 2018, but I think there'll be a leveling off point because there've been a lot of people getting into it who are not into it for the long term.
Right.
And I mean, there've been younger people, who've just, hey, I'm going to get into this vinyl craze.
And that's a great point. I mean, your kids' age, if it hadn't been for the vinyl thing happening, they may not have ever become. They may have always just done digital music. I mean, there is a whole generation of kids out there that never had CDs or records, but because of the vinyl craze, it's put that actual product back into the hands of a lot of kids.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. It gives you such a more intimate relationship with your music if it's something that you can hold and see and feel.
Yeah, and I think the what we're going to see in the future, and this is just my theory, but I think the new prices are going to start coming, like record store day prices are pretty elevated. So I think we're going to start seeing prices come down to the $20 to $30 mark for a new release, unless it's a special edition.
Yeah.
Which really the special editions only appeal to collectors. So the industry is kind of catering to collectors. They're trying to build this collector market. It's like ball cards.
Yeah.
Ball cards have gone through ebbs and flows, and they're coming back again.
Yeah, and the other side of it is, little things like the albums that were never produced on album or never produced on vinyl, but, colored vinyl and variants have become a really big thing too. So it'll be interesting to see if that trend continues with, as we move forward on this crazy sickness journey that we've been on.
Yeah, I really do think the used market will start to come down too.
Yeah.
Because there's some used prices that are just, if you don't know how much stuff's worth, you're going to pay a lot more than you should.
Yeah. Buyer definitely beware. There are sites like Discogs out there, eBay. You can go to eBay and kind of get an idea for what records are going for. There's places to go to make sure that you're not grossly overpaying for something.
Yeah, and even Discogs. I mean, I started, when we were talking about doing this show, I started looking at some of the more valuable records I have and how many have sold, and the prices are starting to come down on those.
Yeah. So, their gravity and physics may exist for the vinyl market after all.
Yeah, and I mean, even, the Walmart pressings and all these new things that have popped up, those are starting to show up on used shelves. And I think that was the first key for a lot of sellers that, wow, things are changing. Not everybody. Well, and it's like the old days. Not everybody had a couple hundred records. There were some people who had like 20 to 50 records.
Right.
You know, one crate.
Yeah.
That's plenty.
Yeah.
And I think those folks, you know, when they decide, and let's face it, vinyl is not an easy medium.
Yeah.
You get a crate and it's heavy.
It's expensive and inconvenient.
Yeah. You're not just, you know, you're listening to one side of the record, then you got to flip it, make sure it's clean, listen to the others. So there's a task involved.
Right.
It forces you to listen to music more.
Yeah. Well, it's really nice to like talk this through and kind of step back, because you don't get a chance to do that very often. But like I said, this last Crossroads show, I really felt it was distinctly different than a lot of the shows over the last 5-10 years.
Yeah,
sure.
I think it's, you know, moving forward, it's definitely going to go on. I think the prices will just change a little bit.
Yeah, and that demand may change those prices too. Well, it's been a good talk. It's always fun to distill what's going down and maybe talk some stuff out for people out there that are just getting their feet wet in the collecting, or maybe people who are up to their neck in it. You know, there's all kinds out there. But we want you guys to go to our YouTube channel. We want you to check out all of the video morsels that we have for you there. We want you to communicate with us. What else do we want them to do?
Subscribe, comment, give us that thumbs up, that like.
Yeah, the subscription really makes a difference. The audio only podcast is out there too, but we'd love for you guys to come and experience Vinyl Ventures on YouTube and YouTube Music. So for Wheels, I'm Jay, and we'll see you all the next time around.